Welcome to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football, USC Primetime Live, presented by FanDuel. Hey, is this NFL Red Zone? Got a little Scott Hansen quad box going on? Yes, that's Nolan Ezett in the bottom left corner. And you might have seen Ethan and Nolan team up on a news reaction video last week. So we welcome Nolan to our team here on the USC channel and USC Primetime Live, but he dove right into news coverage with Ethan. Crash also doing some news reaction videos last week. So go to the USC channel, find all these news videos. Ethan, Crash, and Nolan now pitching in with news shorties, and that is in addition to the bonus cuts, the fork and knife bonus segments for members. You join at the middle Heisman tier, the top national champion tier. It's another way to support the USC channel. And also vocfb.com/shop. You get one of those nice snappy VOCFB USC camo caps. Or if you don't want the camo, you don't have to get the camo. You can get classic black with USC written on it. Any USC branded VOCFB piece of merchandise or apparel, and there are shirts, coffee mugs, tumblers. All of that supports the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football, presented by FanDuel. So we lead with the defensive coordinator search, and here we are in late January, and it's not over. And lots of interesting twists and turns in the overall football coaching carousel. Like, this is a college football show, but like, how has Brian Flores not been hired as an NFL head coach, right? That's an intriguing question in the pro game. And in the college game, Pete Kwiatkowski, what is the deal with this, right? What is up with Pete Kwiatkowski not inking a deal either at USC, Stanford, anywhere? Like, he should be the number one defensive coordinator on the market. He held Ohio State to 14 points in Columbus. Like, that should be very attractive. What's going on, man? So USC's defensive coordinator search continues, and Gary Patterson's the hot rumor. Is Lincoln Riley about to land the plane with someone he used to coach against in the Big 12? Lots of intrigue around this. I usually give it to Ethan first, but hey, it's his debut Tuesday night show. So Nolan, why don't you get us started with your view of where this defensive coordinator search is, where it's going, and why it has unfolded the way it has?
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Matt. I appreciate the warm welcome. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious that I think Patterson is the top hire for Lincoln right now, and Patterson has said, he's basically said, yeah, I'm interested in that job. I mean, he's a big name. He's been coaching forever. 181-79 record with TCU as a head coach, but he comes with that defensive coordinator background. So, I mean, the resume speaks for itself from top to bottom. He fills that resume out. He had a lot of success with TCU, but that success kind of tapered off at the last couple years, and now he hasn't coached in 4 years. And so really, I think the question now is, does Lincoln end up going with Patterson, or does he stay internal? Eric Henderson, who was previously the co-defensive coordinator, is this just him on his own? And to me, that's going to be an interesting question, but it's looking like Patterson. I mean, everyone's kind of saying Patterson is going to be the guy, and I don't hate it. He brings a lot of experience. He has been a head coach, like I said, but he has that defensive history, and that's important.
All right, before I pass it to Ethan for his take, just give me a thought on why Pete Kwiatkowski hasn't been the guy. Why hasn't this materialized? I mean, this is a real head scratcher for a lot of people, not just at USC, but within the college football industry.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure. This, I think this is another.
I think you're scratching your head too.
Yeah, no, I am, but I think this is another one of those moves. We've seen Lincoln Riley. I mean, I give him a lot of hate. He gets a lot of hate from the community. He gets even more hate from the rest of the college football landscape. He's not afraid to go out and do what he thinks is best. And I think a lot of the times, last couple of years, I mean, we've definitely seen, especially if we want to stay within the realm of coaching, keeping Alex Grinch for 2 years, that certainly was a head scratcher, and he lived by that, and he kind of died by that the last 2 years. But I'll give Lincoln Riley credit. he doesn't really care what the skeptics have to say. He does what he thinks is best. Why does he think going for Patterson is the best? At least that's how it seems. I'm not quite sure, but I'll give him credit. He kind of silences those critics. He stands on his business, like he stands on business. I don't know.
Yeah, I think Nolan's got an interesting point on, the Lincoln Riley angle, because I think that the number one thing that concerns me when I read all these articles about Gary Patterson is like, oh, well, Lincoln Riley and Gary Patterson are great friends. And I just think about, I get war flashbacks to all the times that Lincoln Riley hired his friends at USC, and how that turned out, with Alex Grinch, with Benny Wiley, with kind of the whole cast of characters at USC. But I don't know. I think I feel similarly about Gary Patterson as I do about Pete Carroll. I mean, I think Pete Carroll is someone who I'm more attached to just because he comes with that USC background. But, he's on the older side. He's got a lot of coaching experience, but he hasn't been a defensive coordinator in a while. Like, his last job didn't end super well. Like, there's just kind of a lot of the same, I think, concerns. Obviously, Gary Patterson's 10 years younger than Pete Carroll. So, he's got a little bit more youth on his side. But I think that ultimately, I think that this move, going for Gary Patterson would turn out the best if Lincoln Riley's kind of willing, again, to eat a slice of humble pie and is willing to kind of allow Gary Patterson to not, take over and Lincoln take a back seat, but just like kind of, bring his coaching acumen to the table, bring, what he knows about culture and building a program like he did at TCU. And, not like suppress that in favor of what Lincoln wants to do. That to me seems like the way that this would be the most effective and the way that USC would get the most out of hiring Gary Patterson. The way that they get the least out of it is if Gary Patterson's just like another Rob Ryan, where he's a guy who comes in and has a lot of experience, but he just kind of, falls in line with the rest of the culture, which isn't very good. So I think that those are kind of the two ways that I could see this going if USC goes through with the hire, and I certainly hope it's the former and not the latter.
So before I start, Nolan, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to be working with you again. For those who don't know, Nolan and I actually have podcasted before, back when we were both in school on the scoreboard. So Nolan, welcome. Great to be working with you. Excited to hear your takes here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football.
Thanks, Crash. Yeah, excited to be doing it again with you.
Of course. And so my takes on the Patterson thing, I think it's a good hire. Like you were saying, Nolan, he has the experience, obviously a lot of success. It did kind of not exactly go the way TCU was hoping near the end, but obviously I think that defensive experience, I think, still could be good. But then still, it is, like you said, a head scratch that just USC can't get done, whether it's Patterson, Kwiatkowski, any of the candidates, Matt, the three of us here, Matt, Ethan, myself, have been naming over the last few weeks ever since the rumors were that Lynn was leaving and then did leave for Penn State. And I'm wondering, I think back to actually what Ryan Karchi wrote in the LA Times, I think week 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, where it sounds like Lincoln Riley's vision is he wants to try to keep most of the defensive staff together. So especially, and that is a lot easier to do if you promote internally, at which point the most likely candidate would be Eric Henderson, which we all, the three of us here, I can't speak for Nolan yet, agree should not happen. But it seems like kind of that does maybe mess with the candidates. And if Lincoln Riley was a defensive first coach, I could see him wanting to be more involved in it. Like, I know for all the criticisms he gets for being involved, especially in the QBs, or even still calling plays or being involved in the offense, I get it, because you know what? That's his background. That is his forte. It makes a lot of, I get it in that regard, because he has the experience there, but he does not have experience with the defensive side. So if you're going to bring in a defensive coordinator, you got to let him bring in the guys he wants to coach under him. And I don't want to say leave him completely alone, definitely, hold him accountable, but you got to let him be able to do his thing. So I'm wondering if that's just what's been holding up this whole search, when it seems like USC could have possibly gotten Kwiatkowski a long time ago. But then again, is there something about Kwiatkowski we don't know? Because it seemed like he was going to go to Stanford, but there has been no official announcement that I have seen since kind of the rumors first surfaced he was going there. That one, all the rumors there also kind of have just sort of the talk there is sort of just kind of fallen off there. So I really am like, I mean, it could be Patterson, seems like it, but at the same time, I'm wondering, this seems like it could go anyway, considering we just keep hearing different candidates popped up.
Yeah, so let me get your thoughts, guys, on this general comparative question. Patterson versus Kwiatkowski versus Ryan Walters versus Eric Henderson. How much of a gap do you have in your mind? So we're not talking, about what the pundits think, what the experts think, just what you think. How, is it, 1A and 1B's right behind there and its difference is negligible, or no, there's actually some real daylight among these candidates in terms of actual quality? Nolan, why don't you get us started on that one?
I'm saying it's all 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. I think they're really similar. I think Henderson, let me put it this way. If I was a head coach of a different program who didn't have any of those guys employed or formerly employed, Henderson would be the last choice. But Henderson has been with this program for a little while. And the secondary was the main issue with this defense, right? I mean, the defense has taken strides since the Alex Grinch days, but still not where USC needs to be. But the defensive line wasn't really the issue. The pass rush wasn't really the issue. It was the secondary. It was a lack of experience. I didn't see anything in Henderson that I absolutely hate. Because of that, I think they're all really, really similar. And that's where I think that's why we're kind of seeing for Lincoln Riley, if he's friends with Patterson, kind of know how that went previously. He loves hiring his friends, and I don't blame him. I think a lot of coaches would have the same perspective, not just because it's fun to be around your friends, but because you've coached with them before, you're at least friends with them, you have some sort of chemistry, and you feel like you could coach well together. I'm not surprised at all right now that Patterson is atop the list for him, but I think just in terms of coaching quality, I think they're all really similar. And I don't want to say it doesn't matter who USC goes with, but I don't think any of these are real game changers.
I think for me, Pete Kwiatkowski is pretty clearly ahead of the fold. I think just purely because he has the proven track record in the current era of college football. Texas's defense didn't necessarily perform up to standard this past year, but they were great, in 2024, and then they were still very solid this year. I don't know. I think the Kwiatkowski situation is interesting because I think you're starting to see some really interesting NFL jobs open up. So that's maybe what I'm wondering about him. Maybe he's waiting on some of these current defensive coordinators to get hired as head coaches, and other defensive coordinators just some defensive coordinator positions to open up in the NFL. That's what I would wonder about the Kwiatkowski situation. If maybe he has some offers on the table from schools like Stanford, but he's kind of waiting to see if he can, for the NFL dust to settle a little bit, because that is another part of this whole equation, obviously, in terms of the whole coaching carousel. In terms of ranking the other candidates, I guess Gary Patterson is number 2. I am personally not a fan of promoting Eric Henderson. I think that, USC's defensive line was fine in 2025 and I guess better than 2024, but I think it, there was a lot of promise, it looked like, at the beginning of the year, and then it really kind of tapered off towards the end. And so I wouldn't personally take the argument that the defensive line was better than the rest of the defense as a reason to promote Eric Henderson. And then with Ryan Walters, it's a good idea in theory. I'm pretty sure that Washington just kind of re-ups his contract. So I think it's pretty much a pipe dream at this point. I don't really think, after him having his contract restructured, that he's going to immediately go leave to another school. I guess in this era of college football, you never know. You're seeing players enter the portal when they've already signed their NIL contracts. So, loyalty's at an all-time low. But I guess he'd be third in the ranking of 4 with Henderson last. But again, I don't really see that realistically happening at this point anymore.
So I think I have Kwiatkowski at the top of my list, especially like you were saying, Ethan. He's just really kind of nailed just this whole NIL transfer portal game, just this rev share era of college football that we're seeing. I think he's done a good job of it, and it's kind of surprising, like we said, that he got let go by Texas, especially when we keep bringing up him holding Ohio State to 14 points. And then I think my next, and I think just and then I think my next candidate would then be Ryan Walters. I think, like you said, Ethan, it's probably not realistic given the likely contract re-up, but even really the only blemish in Walters' career, why I've been consistently impressed with him, is just other than him, he just clearly wasn't ready or just isn't really kind of the CEO type to be a head coach. And that's part of obviously what just when everything went wrong at Purdue and he ultimately got fired after 2 years going 5-19. But his resume as a defensive coordinator has been very impressive. And immediately after you got fired, you saw just Jed Fish being like, all right, that's our guy. We want him as our DC, especially when you look at what he did at Illinois under Brett Bielema. So really, I think he's kind of my number two, I think, especially that. And I kind of like both Kwiatkowski and Walters for the reason of they're outside the family. They're outside kind of the Lincoln Riley ties. They don't have like these immediate like ties to Lincoln Riley that, or at least that come to mind, at least that I can think of where, they're like, all right, oh, that's my, like, we've been talking about. Lincoln's like, oh, come on, buddy. Like, come join me. We'll have a great time together. We'll win some games, even if, it all falls apart. So I think then that's kind of why I really like Walters. Patterson, I think, obviously a lot, but just what went wrong at the end there. But it seems like kind of, I'd definitely take that over Eric Henderson, who, I mean, I think one day he could be a good coordinator, but I'm not sure it's right for USC to try to promote him yet, especially because he got the opportunity to call a game. Yes, it was a bowl game, but it was a game that USC should have won, might I remind everybody. So I don't think that I think definitely I wish him nothing but the best with whatever his next chapter is. And even if that includes staying at USC, I still don't think they should be promoting him because of the fact he got a trial run when Danton Lynn was suddenly announced as not sticking around for the Alamo Bowl, and Henderson got his opportunity to call the game and really struggled, especially near the end, and ultimately just that egregious 3rd and 20 play that allowed the Horned Frogs to win that bowl game in overtime.
I might point out that around a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, Ethan wrote a piece at Trojans Wire on how TCU's backup quarterback started the Alamo Bowl, but backup quarterback, during the season behind Josh Hoover, Ken Seals, a former Vanderbilt transfer, came into TCU. He was playing for TCU in the Alamo Bowl as QB2 with Hoover out of there. Ethan wrote a piece in which Ken Seals basically said, well, weird things are going on with USC's defense. So like that is a strike against Eric Henderson. My opinion on this, if Gary Patterson is being hired as, quote unquote, Lincoln's friend, meaning that, you're not going to see an overhaul of the staff, that's going to make me angry because I thought at least Rob Ryan was gone as a result of bringing aboard a new defensive coordinator, that the new defensive coordinator, it would be his ship, his show. If Lincoln Riley is just trying to shoehorn a friend into the DC spot and not upset the other positions on the staff, that is no bueno. That feels patchwork. That feels Lincoln trying to do everything just so. That doesn't strike me as the right fit. Gary Patterson, he's a legend. I mean, he is a legitimate Hall of Fame caliber coach. And I've seen, the ESPN coaches film room broadcast. He is whip smart, not questioning his football IQ, but he's been away from this business for a few years. And you got to wonder if if the tank can be refilled for Gary Patterson. Like his chops, his credentials are there, but after a few years away and going into a very new situation, doesn't seem like exactly the right time to bring him aboard. I think Kwiatkowski and Walters are clearly, I'd put them well ahead of Patterson, and then Eric Henderson at the bottom of the ocean. So this goes back to a point of USC should be getting the best. And it was very clear after 2022 that Alex Grinch was not the best. Lincoln Riley brings him back. Here we are, right? You can't settle for a second or third choice. And I know that Pete Carroll was a fourth choice of Mike Garrett in December of 2000. That's the exception that proves the rule. That's the outlier. Generally, you can't settle for a second or third choice. Gary Patterson, is smart and he could make it work, but doesn't inspire the same confidence that Pete Kwiatkowski and Ryan Walters would. All right, one more item on this general topic, and that is Jen Cohen. Lincoln Riley should not have a lot of leverage because he's swung and missed 4 straight seasons. He's going into year 5. Like, this should not be a situation in which the coach is holding the cards. It should be a situation in which the AD is holding the cards. Can't Jen Cohen tell Lincoln Riley, hey, you know what? If you had been rocking it, if you had been winning 11 games a year, crushing it, I'd be giving you carte blanche. I'd be allowing you to set your dinner table exactly how you wanted. But you know what? You failed. So I'm going to let you keep your job, but in exchange, you need to do certain things. Nolan, start us off with your opinion about how you think Jen Cohen is handling all this, how she should be handling all this.
Yeah, I mean, her resume also speaks for itself. She did a great job at Washington. Not sure exactly how hands-on she was there compared to USC, but yeah, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. Lincoln Riley has been underwhelming. I remember when I was first starting my time at USC, that perfectly coincided with when Lincoln Riley came, and I was super excited. What I thought were great things at Oklahoma, not really reading into the deeper detail of, well, he always gets there, but he can't win that final big game, not always making the playoff. And if he is making the playoff, well, he's certainly not winning the Natty. And that's the same problem at USC. Really, he's not even getting to the playoff. He's not getting to the 12-team playoff. Jen Cohen should have the leverage. You're absolutely right. At some point, she's got to put her foot down. Lincoln Riley, I still think, is a very good football coach. I think he's better than most other football coaches. I don't think his job should be gone right now. Absolutely not. And I think those conversations are way too early to be had right now. But Lincoln Riley has no leverage, or at least should have no leverage. I think right now he's just riding off his reputation and the money. It's sunk cost fallacy. We've paid him so much money. USC has paid him so much money, and there's still so much more money for him to be made unless USC and Jen Cohen want to buy out that contract. I think that's the leverage that he's riding on, and I think it's worked so far, unfortunately.
I think I agree. I think Jen Cohen should have a lot of the leverage. I think, will Jen Cohen exert that leverage, I think, is the real question. I mean, I think in recent years, what we think about the moves that Jen Cohen has made, the one that comes to mind most prominently is just kind of like how she and the entire USC football program handled the whole Notre Dame situation. And obviously we know that Notre Dame was not really playing fair, and, they are to blame for the rivalry ending just as much, if not more, than USC is to blame for the rivalry ending. But, it's something that you like to bring up a lot, Matt, which is that, I think that there are a lot of people who feel that Lincoln Riley kind of is, the responsible in a lot of ways for the rivalry ending, and that Jen Cohen kind of catered to him in that situation because, she just kind of took his side and seemingly was not as intent on the rivalry continuing, despite all the history and all that kind of stuff. So, and she was kind of willing to work with everyone else at USC to kind of, let that come to an end. So I don't know. I think, does Jen Cohen see the need to go against Lincoln Riley would be my big question. And I don't know the answer to that. I don't think that history necessarily suggests that she will. I think that, if Jen Cohen had a greater say in this whole situation than Lincoln Riley, I think that the candidate list would be a little bit different. I think you'd see people like Jimmy Lake, who's the senior defensive assistant for the Rams, coming up in conversation because Jen Cohen obviously has ties to him from her days at Washington. And that's not the kind of people who's coming up. It's not the Jimmy Lakes of the world. It's not the Ryan Walters of the world. It's the Gary Pattersons of the world, and the Eric Hendersons of the world. So guys that Lincoln Riley obviously already has ties to. So I don't know. I think while I would like for Jen Cohen to exert her leverage in this situation, I don't necessarily have the faith that she will.
One thing I want to mention that I think everyone knows, but just to reiterate, is Jen Cohen did not hire Lincoln Riley and has yet to give him an extension. So I'm just wondering, is she and obviously Lincoln Riley being there and the contract he has obviously is on Mike Bone. But at the same time, she inherited it. And then obviously everyone thought, okay, all she has to do is just make Lincoln Riley happy. And then, of course, everything fell apart. But I still wonder, is she like, because she didn't hire him, is she just trying to be like, all right, how do I just navigate this mess of a contract I inherited? So I'm wondering, is she just kind of nervous to kind of, work around him, especially because she didn't hire him? But then I also think about that from the other side of Lincoln Riley. I wonder, and I think, Mike Bone had to go, given everything that was going on. I have to wonder, did Lincoln Riley respond better to Mike Bone because he hired him? And I'm just wondering, if Jen Cohen were to give him a contract extension, would he then seem to be, I guess, more reliant? Because I've always kind of looked at it as, at least in general, you don't become the 80s coach unless you're either hired by them or they give you an extension. So Riley, in that regard, is not a Jen Cohen coach. So I'm just wondering, is she just trying to navigate? And then if Riley can sense that and knows he can maybe act with a bit more impunity because he knows that he doesn't have to exactly respond to her, so he can kind of just say and do what he wants. But then again, that's kind of getting the whole program in trouble if, some of these top candidates that, Cohen has connections to could possibly be able to come in and fill that vacant DC job, not just that position, but also the rest of the staff. And I'm not sure I'd see Jimmy Lake going in there, especially given what happened at Washington and Cohen having to fire him, which ultimately did lead her to bring in DeBoer. But I get what you're talking about, those types of candidates, Ethan, that are kind of more top tier, the Kwiatkowskis, even Ryan Walters, even though, it seems like he signed an extension, but just those higher level candidates that could just fill out the whole entire defensive staff. So I just wonder, is that just what it is because of the fact that Lincoln Riley was not hired by Jen Cohen and has not gotten a contract extension from USC since she was appointed AD?
The intrigue surrounding this defensive coordinator search continues. It could be that, by the time you watch this video, now obviously people are watching us live on Tuesday night at our regular time, but if you're watching this Wednesday, Thursday, could be a deal made official with Gary Patterson. We will see what the next step in this drama turns out to be. All right, so USC Primetime Live, USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. We're presented by FanDuel. So let's go into the FanDuel Game of the Week. And it's a big one for USC fans. Sam Darnold tries to become the first USC quarterback to start a Super Bowl. Never been one. So Darnold's going to try and do that this Sunday. So as we pull up the odds from FanDuel, the Seattle Seahawks, 2.5-point favorites over the Los Angeles Rams, minus 146 money line. Rams plus 124. The over-under, 47 and a half. The under juiced at minus 118, the over at almost even money at minus 104. So Nolan, your predictions, your assessment for Sam Darnold and the Seattle Seahawks in this game.
Yeah, well, I'm actually surprised. The line is only 2.5. I don't know. I think in general, Seattle at least has been perceived as the better team. Then you had home field advantage, especially with the 12th man over there. I don't know. I honestly thought it was going to be more than a field goal. For me, though, I've been riding the Rams this entire postseason. I think the Rams are really good. And I think a lot of it comes down to the Seahawks, I will admit, are a more well-rounded team. And I think if it's going to be some sort of, I don't want to say blowout, because I don't think it'll be a blowout. But if it comes down to it's a 2-score game and there's a clear winner, probably is the Seahawks. They're the better team. They've got home field advantage. That's that. But if this is a game where it's kind of almost last quarterback to have the ball wins, or it's a battle of 2 quarterbacks, I trust Stafford. I hate to say it as a USC fan, and I think Darnold is on an incredible, I don't even want to call it a comeback, but it's just, I guess it kind of is a comeback of a career, or at least making a real strong name for himself in the NFL. I would love to see Sam Darnold in the Super Bowl. I think it'd be awesome. It's awesome for USC, and it's awesome for a guy that was overlooked his entire NFL career because he was on a horrible system that didn't fit him, and quite honestly, doesn't fit anyone. But I think Stafford really is that guy. He brings that playoff experience. I think Sam Darnold might be a year or two away to becoming that first USC starting quarterback in the Super Bowl, unfortunately. Go Seahawks, go Sam Darnold, but Matt Stafford is that guy in the playoffs.
So I think for me, I'm also surprised the line is only 2.5. I would expect Seattle to win by more than that, and I am picking Seattle. And the reason why is it actually has nothing to do with the talent on the field, and it has everything to do with Sean McVay. I watched Sean McVay make some of just the most puzzling decisions I've ever seen a coach make in my entire life against the Bears. I just don't know. Like, Sean McVay deserved to lose that game. Like, not necessarily, the Rams players played hard, and, they came up with some big defensive plays in the end, and, Harrison Mevis made the field goal and whatever. Sean McVay was coaching like he wanted to lose, or at least like he didn't really want to win, because it was the most conservative. Like, he basically gave the ball back to Caleb Williams with 2 minutes left in the game. And then, in overtime, like, didn't try to keep the ball in the hands of his best players, which are on the offensive side of the ball. So I don't know. Sean McVay's just in a really weird headspace right now, it seems, about the talent on his team. He has quite possibly the NFL MVP on his sideline, and yet he's not, and he's calling like a run play on 3rd and 6 with 2 minutes left in the game. Like, I don't understand it at all. So there's just been a lot of that from the Rams this season that I've seen. It's just been a weird year for Sean McVay. And so I don't trust him on the road against such a talented Seattle team at all. Regardless of what the talent is on the field. And Mike Macdonald, on the other hand, has just been acing every test this year. He's just been incredible ever since Seattle hired him. I think, he's only going to continue to get better. And so I have a lot more trust in Mike Macdonald. So I'd pick the Seahawks, I think, pretty clearly. And I'll throw my disclaimer out there. I don't like either of these teams because I'm a 49ers fan. So the Seahawks just crushed my Niners on Saturday. And then I was vehemently rooting against the Rams on Sunday, and I was rooting for Caleb Williams to squeak through. But yeah, that's definitely not clouding my analysis here, because I would definitely say my hate for the Seahawks is stronger over the years, just because of, having to deal with getting beat by the Legion of Boom and all those memories. And so, but I can put all that aside and admit that clearly the Seahawks are the better team. And I think that Mike Macdonald at this point is clearly the better coach as well.
I'm not really buying into the hype of the Rams saying, oh, they got past Chicago. They got past Caleb Williams. Oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl. I've been having to read Bill Plaschke ever since the playoffs days, like, Rams are winning the Super Bowl. Like, no arguments, like, case closed. Like, you know how Plaschke is. I mean, love reading the guy, but sometimes I don't get his takes. And this is one such instance. And that is because I'm thinking, why are you underestimating the number 1 seed of the NFC, who is tied for having the best record in the NFL this year, at home? Weather's going to be a factor, and just the team's been playing well. And like you said, Ethan, obviously Sam Darnold is on the comeback. I think he's been playing very well. Might not be the best quarterback, but Seattle is the better team. They have the better players. They've been playing better all year. Why would that suddenly change, especially at the game in Seattle? And I'm also been impressed with Mike McDonald, and especially just, yeah, it was impressive to see the Rams get that win over the Bears, even though I was pulling for Caleb because of just everything he did when he was at USC. But at the same time, I just don't see how the Seahawks are going to drop this one. And I think they're going to cover it. So really, like, I'd take I think they're going to cover and take the over. I think they're just going to really just dominate this game. So just really, even though I think obviously it's impressive to see the Rams do what they've done, I just don't really see how they're going to get past Seattle up in Seattle.
Well, I am a Seahawk fan. I lived in Seattle for over 20 years. And, of course, Pete Carroll coaching there certainly didn't hurt in terms of my Seahawk fandom. Maybe I should be bullish on the Seahawks, but the Rams are Sam Darnold's kryptonite. We saw it when he was with the Vikings. And, that comeback in mid-December, that was a lucky duck for the Seahawks. The Rams had no business losing that game. The Rams have had no business losing most of the games that they've lost. They should have put away most of the games they won. Remember the Eagles and the late blocked field goal? I mean, the Rams have been in a commanding position in most of the games they've lost. And I think that, just in terms of their roster, top to bottom, they have the best roster in the NFL, but they played with their food a few times, and one of those was against the Seahawks. That's why they're going to Seattle instead of hosting this game. So, I'm the editor of Trojans Wire. It's good for the family. It's good for business if Sam Darnold wins this game. But I've had rotten luck at Trojans Wire. I haven't had a college football playoff in 5 years. I haven't had a Final Four in 5 years. I have come to expect heartbreak, disappointment, failure. So I need Sam Darnold to get past his kryptonite. He needs to prove it. Call me a doubting Thomas if you want. I hope I'm wrong. I pray I'm wrong. But I'm going with the Rams in this game. All right, much more on our show. We're going to talk about USC and the transfer portal and also talk about what the Miami-Indiana game means for USC. But before we do that in the second half of our show, here's a word from our sponsor. We'll see you in a minute.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select a betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
All right, we're back with the second half of our show. And so, Nolan, I've been talking to Ethan and Crash about the transfer portal, what they think. How about what you think about the transfer portal? Not a ton of splashes, a few, but I think the general sentiment is, wait, wasn't Chad Bowden supposed to, go to Whole Foods and get these high-end groceries? It seems like he went to Circle K.
Yeah, Chad Bowden and Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley's been a huge fan of the transfer portal. That's how Lincoln Riley really put USC back on the forefront of the map once he got here. That's how you got Caleb Williams and everyone since then. I'm not an opponent, though, of kind of keeping your squad mostly as it is, retaining all of your guys. I mean, USC didn't have many guys going out either. There weren't that many splashes for acquisitions, but you get to keep the offensive line exactly the same. I think that was the biggest plus for USC. I mean, it's what reminds me 4 years ago with Caleb Williams, his first year at USC. He was so successful because that line looked like Miami a season ago, where you had like 10 seconds to pass. So honestly, I don't consider it a net negative. I think not having really anyone who contributed to USC leave, but also not really landing any splashes either, is perfectly fine. You also bring back Maeva, who I think for the purpose of next season's record is probably gonna yield a better result than Longstreet would have. But this is a whole rabbit hole I can get down. I was Team Longstreet from the very start. I don't think Maeva is the guy that's going to bring you to a national championship. I think Longstreet is, and I think USC had to start Longstreet at some point, and now it's obviously too late. But just for the purpose of next season, Maeva probably is the better quarterback. He's going to be atop the Heisman race to start the year. I don't hate it. I don't hate not landing any splashes.
Ethan, Crash, any developments in your thought process since our last show last Tuesday? Has anything about the landscape, the calculus changed from your vantage point? Ethan, then Crash.
I think it's not like a crazy dramatic thought about USC's class or anything like that. But I will say I'm glad to be avoiding a lot of the drama that some of these other programs are experiencing with their quarterbacks, like deciding to leave after they've signed NIL deals. So, at least we're not in that boat. We can be grateful that at least, Jaden Maeva didn't announce that Jaden Maeva was returning on Twitter to, a lot of people's not disappointment, but I don't know. The traditionalists don't love USC announcing its re-signings on social media, only for him to then turn around and say, oh, well, Miami's offering me $10 million under the table, so I'm actually leaving. So at least we're not in one of those situations like with DeMond Williams, who ended up coming back to Washington, but that was still a whole huge issue. And then now with Darian Mensah at Duke, which it sounds like Duke is now suing him. So that's a whole saga that we'll see how that one plays out, because obviously it doesn't really have a ton of precedence in the college football world. But yeah, I mean, at least we're not in one of those scenarios, especially with the defensive coordinator situation. Like, I could have seen, USC, bringing in all this top defensive talent on the defensive side of the ball, especially in the 2026 recruiting class. And then Danton left, and there wasn't really like this mass exodus because of it. Like, everybody kind of stuck around. So there's some sort of continuity there that they're believing in, and that I think is encouraging. So yeah, it, again, not a super complicated thought, but just one that came to mind because some of these odysseys with other schools and other quarterbacks especially is pretty ridiculous.
So my thoughts are on it. I think we got to think back to what Chad Bowden said when he was hired, which was, quote, "We're going to major in recruiting and minor in the transfer portal." So I think they kind of have been trying to stick to more of that logic. So that's why we're not seeing them getting, going out and getting everyone they can and just, stocking the roster with talent like they're trying to win a national championship. I'm not saying they're not going for a national championship, but they're not just, stocking talent like LSU, Texas, some of those teams like in the SEC who are just fully just reloading on their rosters. So I think obviously it kind of works in how they're trying to play, I think, the long game. But and obviously the guys they have gotten the transfer portal have impressed me. I think Jontez Williams, I think, was the guy who stood out most for getting him from Iowa State. But I do wonder now, with just Indiana now winning the national championship in year 2 under Kurt Cignetti, and heading in this year was the losingest program in college football. It was like 750, 760 something losses they'd had all time. Like, I think I saw it. I think I saw on the graphic before the national championship game last night, something like that. But I'm just wondering, now that Cignetti did in year 2 with the guys that he did it with, fans aren't going to have the patience for it. So I'm just wondering, while everyone's saying, oh, you got to recruit and play the long game, but if everyone else is playing the transfer portal, having these older, more mature, stronger, physically stronger guys on their rosters, who's probably going to win? Chip Kelly said it best. Big people beat up little people. Like, I think it's just really going to change how it happens. So I'm wondering, is Bowden going to have to adjust his strategy for 2027 and beyond because of how you just kind of need to find the guys who give you the best shot to win now, because you might not get tomorrow. You got to win today because you might not get tomorrow, I think is kind of what is ultimately going to happen as a result of Indiana winning the national championship last night. And even if they hadn't won last night, I still think just that philosophy of them just, having that, like, even if they hadn't won the championship, they still had a dang good case to be the greatest turnaround in sports history. But it is definitely the greatest case now, not especially because they hoisted that hardware.
All right, we're definitely going to follow up on that point. But first, I want to talk to Ethan about something, because, Ethan, you wrote several weeks ago at Trojans Wire about how Lincoln Riley and USC put out a tweet or a message saying, wait until January 2026. And like, so to me, that was a head fake, because that social media message conveyed the impression that, we're gonna really go for it. Like, we're gonna be the Dodgers. We're gonna get Kyle Tucker. We're gonna get everybody once again, and it didn't turn out that way. So I just want to address that particular article you wrote several weeks ago. That USC kind of lead the fan base along? Like, where are you with that in retrospect, now that portal season's winding down?
No, I think you're spot on there. I think that you echo what a lot of Trojan fans have been saying online. Is a lot of people have actually been revisiting that post in the wake of kind of how USC's transfer portal went, and saying, well, what's going on here? Like, what was this really about? What was there to kind of wait for in January of 2026? The only thing that I can think of is that, like, maybe at that point USC had some sort of inkling about how much of the roster was going to be returning. And so that was like their way of saying, like, because, at that point when they put out the post, we didn't know that Jaden Mayava was going to be coming back. We didn't know that they were going to be getting all 5 offensive linemen back. We didn't know, Wayman Jordan was going to be coming back. Like, some of these like top players who could have entered the draft. So maybe, and because I think that initial like wave of players returning did kind of feel like it was aligned with the post. Like, it was like, okay, like, USC has signed the 2026 recruiting class, and now step 2 is all of these players are coming back. Mayava, the offensive line, others, a lot of, pretty much everybody who was a meaningful contributor to the team other than Devin Tompkins and Walker Lyons. So that, felt like it was backing up that post. But then, yeah, you're kind of right. The transfer portal comes around and it kind of falls flat. And I think, we've talked a lot on the show about majoring in recruiting and minoring in the portal and whatever, and that kind of merit as a philosophical idea. I think that like, if you want to say that has merit as a philosophical idea, fine. I think the issue is USC needs to win now. And, Lincoln Riley needs to win now if he wants to keep his job. And the way to win now is to have guys who are in their 4th or 5th or 6th year on your defensive line and at other positions of importance, because like that's what Indiana and Miami had yesterday. Is they had, not only skull crushers on the defensive line, but skull crushers on the defensive line who were in their 5th year of college football. Like it was not like they had Jakeem Stewart on their defensive line who, we all hope is going to become a skull crusher, but is still 18 years old and was dealing with a foot injury all season. Like, they had a wealth of guys with a wealth of experience. And that kind of is the thing that NIL has changed about this era of college football, is you can keep those guys around for longer because you can now pay them to play in college. So they're not as anxious to get to the NFL, and they're willing to spend those extra years on development and stuff. So I think that is kind of where, and especially like you saw it show up on USC's defense last season. It was clear as day. Like, it's not that these freshmen are not talented. It's not that guys like Jakeem Stewart, Desmond Stevens, like Jaden Walker, like Marcellus Williams. Like, it's not like these guys aren't talented. They're very clearly very athletic. And their high school resume and their recruiting pages and all that, they speak for themselves. but they're freshmen. And so they made dumb freshman mistakes. And, because they were the only option at those positions, they made those dumb freshman mistakes, and it cost USC games like the Notre Dame game and the Oregon game. And like, that's the thing about this incoming 2026 recruiting class too, is like, they can have all the talent in the world. They're also going to be 18 and 19 years old. So, and there's nothing that can teach them out of being 18 or 19 years old. Like, you can, and, to even have any hope of doing that, you need an elite coaching staff who's really good at instilling culture and accountability and making players play like they're older than they are, which I don't think USC staff has proven that it can. So that's kind of why, to me, the portal, this portal season was a little bit more troubling. It's not necessarily that, like I said, the philosophical idea of majoring in recruiting and minoring in the portal is bad in the long run, but USC didn't start at that place. And now we're in year 5. And the clock is ticking on Lincoln Riley. And so I don't think that is a strategy that we can put up with in 2026, because it's not a strategy that is necessarily super conducive to winning a national championship immediately.
Yeah, we're in year 5. I mean, this really gets to the heart of it. We're in year 5, and USC is doing something that needs to be done in year 2, year 3. I mean, just that fundamental mismatch that points to the discomfort and the incongruence that we see at USC. All right, Nolan, want to get you back onto the show, of course, now, and take a crack at this question from our friend, longtime viewer, Gerardo Zalata. And the question is, do you hire the best available defensive coordinator? And if he wants to bring half his staff, so be it, even at the possibility of losing players and your best recruiters, or consider player wishes. Getting to this point of, well, gosh, we got to preserve this recruiting class. But then you look at what Signetti's done in Indiana, as Crash is pointed out, mature veteran guys. Ethan alluded to it as well. And, with a coach who's on the hot seat, or at least theoretically could be on the hot seat, could be gone next year, like, that could sacrifice the recruiting class as well. So the proper mindset could be, one could certainly make the case, you need to do whatever you can to make sure Lincoln Riley wins this year. Because if he doesn't win this year, he might not be there next year. And then this recruiting class that you worked so hard to keep in for 2026, it's not going to be there for 2027. So a lot of ping pong balls in the air. Nolan, walk us through and help and tackle Gerardo's question here.
Well, the best and really only thing in Lincoln Riley's tenure at USC that he's ever done to maintain job security is this recruiting class. He hasn't done anything else that has helped keep his job secure. Everything else that he's done put him on the hot seat more and more. But this recruiting class for 2026, in my opinion, has given him at least 2, maybe 3 more years of comfort. Because what are you going to do? Buy out the contract, get rid of Lincoln Riley and all those players? You're not doing that. You've invested this much into Lincoln Riley. You bought this much into Lincoln Riley, and all these players that he and his staff have recruited, you're going to let them go? You're not doing that unless Curt Cignetti says, hey, I want to go to USC. And then, yeah, by all means, snap your fingers, go get Cignetti. I mean, why does Indiana have Cignetti, but USC doesn't? That's another question. But as it relates to the DC, I don't think, the defensive coordinator, I don't think who you hire is going to affect your recruiting class as much. I think that question really more so pertains to Lincoln Riley. And I kind of gave my answer, but to me, it's Lincoln Riley, you got to keep him because you need that class. The defensive coordinator, if for whatever reason, one possible candidate is going to have some ripple effect that's going to get that's I don't know, going to cause a lot of these players to decommit, don't hire him. Because again, I was kind of saying, I think it's a 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D situation. I don't think anyone really separates themselves to me of the 4 candidates we walked through. But by all means, if one of them causes a concern to a lot of that class, I don't want him near that class. The thing I'm most excited about USC in the future is this number 1 recruiting class. That's the future of USC.
All right, Nolan, I got to follow up. You think Lincoln Riley, he's getting 2027 unless 2026 is an absolute disaster? That's where you stand.
Exactly. And I think that's also a possible reason why he decided to say, you know what, I'm okay letting Longstreet go. I want the security that Maeva brings me so that I know I'm at least going 7-5, 8-4, which is probably enough to get me another year anyway. But that coupled with such a great recruiting class for 2026, I think that means he keeps his job, unless it's a total detriment
All right.
this season.
7-5, he keeps his job.
Yep.
Are you going to go on record saying that?
Yeah, 7-5, he keeps his job. I think without this recruiting class, he very likely would have gotten fired. But with this recruiting class, it's going to take a horrible season to get rid of this guy. I hate to tell you.
I feel ill, Ethan.
I mean, maybe it's wishful thinking because I think, it'd have to be a pretty excellent 8-4 to keep him around. And I've been saying all off season that 7-5 and, towards the end of the season too, as after the Oregon loss and as we kind of started looking to next season, I've always thought that 7-5 wasn't enough kind of regardless. And this kind of leads into my point about the defensive coordinator actually, which is that, I mean, I'm going to, take Gerardo's question super literally. Best available defensive coordinator. So the best available defensive coordinator that I could potentially conceive of in my mind is Nick Saban. I don't think USC is going to hire him, obviously. That's like totally and completely out the window. But I'm just saying, like, if USC hires the best available defensive coordinator, it's like an absolute rock star like that. So you're really going to tell like a Nick Saban that he can't pick and choose who his assistant coaches are? Like that to me is ridiculous. And it's not that USC is going to hire Nick Saban, because I've been very clear that they're not going to. Again, that's an idea just as ridiculous as telling Nick Saban that he can't hire his own assistant coaches. But like, I don't know. I think it would just be a fundamental misunderstanding of what's made these coaches so successful to, kind of come at them and say, you kind of need to play nice with our current coaching staff and our current players. Like, coaches, especially at the college level, coaches make players far more than players make coaches. I mean, that's the Cignetti tried and true model. Like, Curt Cignetti just won the national championship with a bunch of 2-stars. I loved Fernando Mendoza's post-game interview, by the way, because, he kind of goes on national television and he's like, by the way, I was a 2-star recruit out of high school and I tried to walk on at Miami and they wouldn't let me because I was so terrible. And, now I'm a national champion. And it feels like just yesterday that Fernando Mendoza was starting for a bad Cal team. Like, Curt Cignetti recruiting him to Indiana completely changed the trajectory of his career. He, plays anywhere else and he has no business being in the Heisman conversation, no business being in the conversation for the number 1 pick. But because he, made the right choice and joined Curt Cignetti at Indiana, he's the Heisman Trophy winner, the best quarterback in the class, and he's going to probably go to the Raiders number 1 overall in the upcoming draft. So, like, so to me, there is, I don't know. I just think it's to insinuate to a coach like that, which again, USC is not going to hire a Nick Saban, but they should at least be trying to find as close to Nick Saban as they can possibly get, right? Like, this is USC. This is what we've been talking about the entire show. They should want and demand the best. And, even if you can't land, shoot for the stars and land on the stars, you need to at least shoot for the stars and land on the moon, and get somebody who, is as close to the most excellent person that you can possibly conceive of to lead your defense. And I think you treat them, even if they're not a Nick Saban level person, you treat them as such, because like I said, I think coaches make players far more than players make coaches, especially at the college level. So to me, it's just insulting to, if you're a guy who thinks of themselves as an elite defensive coach, to have USC, who has, Lincoln Riley doesn't know how to lead a good defense, and USC hasn't, even before Lincoln Riley was here, it was Clay Helton, and Clay Helton didn't know how to put a good defense on the field, especially those last couple of years. So there's no, like, USC has no ground to stand on in terms of knowing what's best for a defense, especially now that Danton Lynn's gone. So the idea that, USC would say, well, we know better than you about what your defensive staff should be, and you somehow don't, to me is kind of ridiculous. Like I understand that this defensive staff is supposedly comprised of great recruiters and whatever, but again, coaches make players way more than players make coaches. Like, it doesn't matter if you recruit a bunch of 4 and 5 stars if they don't pan out to be anything, because you can't coach them up. Because like, all that's going to win you is recruiting rankings, and the 247 Sports says you're the number 1 recruiting class. Congratulations. 247 Sports doesn't award the national championship. So I think, and again, we can cover countless examples of this, right? Like, Malachi Nelson was a 5-star. Sam Heward was a former 5-star quarterback. Like, just getting top recruits doesn't guarantee you the national title. So I think USC should be prioritizing landing a top coach far more than they should be prioritizing retaining this class. I think that if the class is worth their merit, if they're actually a good football player who wants to become the best version of themselves, and they're not just hiding behind a ranking, they'll respond to USC hiring the best defensive coordinator and the best defensive staff possible, even if it's not the guy that they committed to playing with.
Okay, before Crash comes in, just want to make one point to amplify what Ethan just said. Especially with high-profile quarterbacks, we often think they're busts, or that they're not going to get it done, but then they get the right coach and everything turns around for them. Look at Caleb Williams with Matt Eberflus and then Ben Johnson, right? Look at Fernando Mendoza under Justin Wilcox, and then he goes to Kurt Signetti, all right? Sam Darnold, Adam Gase with the New York Jets, and Matt Rule with the Carolina Panthers, and then Kevin O'Connor, he goes to KOC with the Vikings, and then Mike McDonald with the Seahawks. Coaching, situations, just player development. It's not the player himself in most cases, it's the situation. Like, if Patrick Mahomes had gone to the Cleveland Browns or the Tennessee Titans, where is he and where is his career today, right? No, he landed with Andy effing Reid and the Chiefs. Like, that meant everything. Like, do we think he was going to be good if he went to, one of the worst run organizations like the Raiders? What if Patrick Mahomes went to the Raiders? Do we think that he'd be a hill of beans right now?
No.
It's situations. It's coaching. So wanted to amplify what Ethan said. All right, Crash.
So I think to answer this question, Gerardo, I think certainly, obviously I'm not saying I don't want to lose players, but what if coaching's struggling? And I think especially at this point, you got to consider most of the recruits have already put pen to paper. They can't get out of it unless, they want to face a lawsuit, at which point they're welcome to, I suppose. I mean, we're seeing plenty of that. Damon Williams decided going to court wasn't worth it. We'll see what Darian Mensah decides over at Duke. But I think in terms of recruits and players, they're more tied to the head coach, and at least that's kind of what can trigger a new transfer portal or extend a transfer portal window for them, is if the departure or removal of a head coach, not so much a coordinator. So I still think if players come in, they don't like the DC, especially with the state of where USC is right now, and especially what kind of we've seen wins you championships. I'm wondering, are you better off bringing that coach? And they're like, all right, if you don't like it, all right, bye-bye. Like, I'm fine with that, because I think long-term, I think it's better for the success of the program, especially if USC does try to go with a revamp and maybe go the different model or different blend of recruits versus transfer portal next year. So I'd more lean to, you want to get that best dang DC you can get. And then and he gets to bring his staff, not even just half the staff, his whole staff, whoever he wants. If he wants to keep staff, fine with me. But if he wants to bring in his guys, you let him bring in his guys, and then you figure out the rest of it. Then you figure out the consequences of it with the players afterwards. Because if you're willing to bet on him and you can get that best dang guy, you're probably going to be okay when it comes to recruiting, both via high school and via the portal.
All right, final segment of the show. We have to say something about the national championship game between Miami and Indiana. And Nolan, let me just tell you, like, by far, my biggest concern for USC in 2026 in terms of position groups is the defensive line. And that's part of why I'm disappointed in the transfer portal. Like, I thought we needed a premium, high-end defensive tackle in the portal to really shore up that run defense. And then, so looking at Indiana versus Miami, Nolan, and obviously Ethan and Crash can weigh in as well, but these were the two best defensive lines in college football. 1 + 1 = 2, right? They were playing for the national title, and it was a pretty evenly matched game. I mean, Indiana was better, but Miami was right there at the end. Indiana's offensive lineman said, like, this was the best defensive line we faced all season long. Indiana's defensive line was solid with, 2 injured starters, two stars missing, Kellen Wyatt, Stephen Daly. Like, imagine what Indiana would have done in the playoff if it had those 2 injured stars on its defensive line available to play. So Nolan, I'm like, I don't feel very optimistic about USC making the playoff in 2026, if only because how is our defensive line going to even come close to the very high bar that Indiana, also Ohio State, set on defensive line? Like, USC is not in that zip code as far as I'm concerned. What's your take?
Yeah, absolutely not. I've said the entire season Ohio State had the best defense in college football. But Miami and Indiana were not far behind. And especially when you look at the offensive line, both squads were great. And Miami especially, I mean, just look at the size of their defensive line. They were physically dominant. They physically dominated every single opponent. And that's how they got to the national championship. I know they didn't win it. Fernando Mendoza and Indiana and Cignetti, it seems like once Ohio State was out of it, Indiana was going to win. I thought that was pretty obvious. But Miami got there from their defensive line. I'll be very clear about that. The reason I think Indiana won, though, isn't just because of their defensive line. It's not just because of their defense in general. It's because they found their coach. They found the coach that works. I kind of alluded this before, but how come Indiana, of all teams, as Crash just said, is the losingest team in college football in 2 years? They win a national championship. How come they have Curt Cignetti while USC has Lincoln Riley, who at the time of getting hired was perceived as a top 5 coach in college football, and it's now year 5. USC hasn't made a college football playoff. The closest they've gotten was in 2022 when it was a 4-team playoff, and if it was a 12-team playoff, sure, they would have been in it. But how come Indiana can do that with Cignetti? Indiana found the right coach, and it worked. USC doesn't look like they found the right coach. And if it is the right coach, well, right now he's not the right coach. Defense definitely does help win championships. I've never been an offense or a defense wins championships guy. I think they're both absolutely necessary. And I think you saw that from Indiana. Unfortunately, USC and defense, they just don't go together. It hasn't happened in a long, long time. I'm also concerned about the secondary, though. The secondary was horrible this past season. I think there will be strides taken forward, but that was the weakest point of this team. And it reminded me of the Alex Grinch days where a big play is up in the air any given second of a USC football game.
Ethan and Crash.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I think on paper, I mean, USC retained a lot of guys. I think it kind of says a lot that they didn't retain Devin Tompkins, who was obviously their best, most productive defensive lineman. And then he ends up going to Alabama. So, it doesn't even feel like USC hit a home run with retention. Like, yeah, Cam Crawford is coming back, Braylon Shelby. Like, you've got some guys who racked up like 4 sacks last season who, were former top recruits who have shown flashes of talent who are coming back, right? Like, Jakeem Stewart will be a sophomore and he'll be fully healthy. Like, I don't know. I think a full offseason of Tremaine Carroll will help. And, I wrote today at Trojans Wire that USC hired one of Tremaine Carroll's former staffers at Kansas State as well, who'd kind of become their director of strength and conditioning. So 2 off seasons in a row, they've hired away Kansas State's director of strength and conditioning to join the USC staff. So it should be a great off season of strength and conditioning. Hopefully, getting to compete all offseason against this great offensive line also will make the defensive line better because, USC's obviously got one of the best offensive lines in college football returning for next year. And a lot of great offensive line talent coming in the recruiting class too, by the way. Don't sleep on that as well. But I don't know. There's certainly not. I echo your sentiment right now that it doesn't feel like they've hit a home run at that position, kind of in any phase. Again, like you hope Luke Wayfull comes in and makes an immediate impact. You hope some of these guys develop, but that's kind of all we're operating on is hope. And USC hasn't really proven it. Eric Henderson hasn't really proven it. And, while the defensive line was better in 2025, it felt like only marginal improvement compared to 2024 and not, massive improvement. It was, not like Jaden Mayava, who felt like a completely transformed player in 2025 compared to 2024. It was just kind of like a slight progression, if anything. So I guess we'll see. Like I said, there's reasons to believe if you want to find them, like Tremaine Carroll being here for full off season, and the talent that could be really excellent, but USC certainly hasn't earned the benefit of the doubt. And so I'm kind of like where you said you were earlier on the Seahawks Rams game. Like I don't feel hopeful because USC hasn't really earned that from my perspective.
I think for obviously what this game just says is like, just really like I was saying earlier, it's just like fan patience, just administrator patience for the football program, not just around the country, is going to change for every coach. Like you can't just be selling. You can't walk into an interview anymore and be like, all right, give me 4 or 5 years and, soon we'll be hoisting natties. In this era, you've got the transfer portal and you can bring in whoever it is that you need to get. I think it just shows that it's like there's no more patience. And even same thing with Mario Cristobal. I mean, there have been times he's had his inexplicable moments both at Oregon and Miami, but you got to give the man credit for what he did at Miami and get that program all the way back to national championship. So I think really big thing I took away was obviously I know there was, Matt, you mentioned obviously the defensive line. That was obviously very impressive on both sides, especially just how Miami, literally bloodied up Fernando Mendoza, and obviously Indiana gave Carson Beck trouble all night. But I think at the end of the day, it just really the big thing I'm drawing out is, and just from what I was reading over the last 24 hours, just patience is wearing thin across the country as a consequence of what Curt Cignetti did. So really, I think that's the thing that is going to have to happen is USC has to figure out a way to be like, all right, how can we get the guys that are going to get us into the playoff, into the semifinals, into the national championship game. So we lift that hardware. So really it's just, that's the big thing I took away. It wasn't so much just, not to say I didn't enjoy the game because that was a great game, but really it was just the whole, just where teams are going to be with patience and just how USC is not there. They're on year 5 with Lincoln Riley, and they haven't seemed to really get as close as they were from that year 1 where they would have been in that 12-team playoff had it existed, but unfortunately for them, it didn't. So it's just kind of, really just, obviously, I think really it just goes back to kind of everything we've been saying where you kind of have to, wonder what's going on with USC, but really just, Lincoln Riley, I think, is going to probably feel a lot more pressure this year because of what happened with Curt Cignetti at Indiana over the last 2 years.
All right, folks. So great debut show for Nolan Ezett. We welcome him to our team here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football, USC Primetime Live, presented by FanDuel. We're going to be here next Tuesday night, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in Los Angeles, and the rest of the West. So will USC have a defensive coordinator? One would think so. We'll be chopping that one up next Tuesday. Will Sam Darnold be in Super Bowl 60? We'll be talking about that as well. Coaching staff developments. We'll talk a little bit more about USC's lower tier hires. Ethan alluded to them. He's written about them at Trojans Wire. We'll dig into those topics a little bit more next week, plus any other timely news. And, Ethan and Crash are producing news videos now. If there's breaking news, one of them will be on top of it. So that's why you want to keep coming back to the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. So for Nolan Ezett, Ethan Inman, and Crashlet Collier, this is Matt Zemek. Thanks for watching our show. We will see you again next Tuesday. Fight on and go Sam Darnold.